Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and what I wanted to do was talk about using objects and functions in a weird compound way that allows you to create like a cool super compound function thing. Um, yeah, okay. So let's just imagine I say this is my function, my function. Okay, and it equals two arguments. And we're going to call it the command. There's going to be a string that kind of tells us which function to run. And then we'll have an arg object, which is just an object that has the right arguments for the particular function you're running. Okay. And then again, we use an arrow. Okay, now what I want to do here is create an object with all the different things that this particular object can do. So we'll call this my commander. Why not? Okay, equals. Okay, and essentially at the end of this function, the punchline is going to be that this function can do many things, because at the very end of the function, all it really does is take the commander object, pass in the string of the command to see which function from that object to run, and then passes it the arg object. Okay, so essentially we're making this one function sort of a giant sort of collection of functions inside of it. Okay, in this kind of fun, interesting way. Okay, and again, it's just to show you sort of a pattern that I thought was interesting. Okay, and this to show you the power of just like passing strings, dynamic keys into an object. I always just find this very fascinating, and it's helped me through a lot of different solutions. So kind of like, instead of having to use a switch statement or a bunch of if statements, to sit there and just say, hey, okay, you just pass the string to the object, and then the key with whatever I wanted to happen, there's a function underneath that key that does the thing I want it to do. Okay, so here's what I'll do. We're going to just say that we'll just create a basic calculator. Okay, so we're going to have a key of add, which will just be a function that takes the arg object. Okay, and it's just going to return a dot 1, because we're going to say assume that it has a property called 1, and add to a plus 2. Okay, and I'll just keep it real simple. This is to illustrate this. Okay, so then we will have sub for subtract. Then we will have mult for multiply. And then we will have div. Okay. And we just want to make sure that you don't divide by 0. Well, I'm not going to even bother really worrying about that right now. I just won't. I could just use a ternary, check if the second thing is not 0. Like, I could do this. I could just do if a equals 0. Okay. Actually, the way I would do it was this. I would do if a dot 2 equals 0, then what I would do is instead return the string can't divide by 0. And if it's not 0, it's any other number, then you can divide by it. Okay, and there you go. I've made a check to make sure you don't divide by 0. Okay, cool. Because again, this evaluates first. So is 2 0? If it's 2 is 0, and then I'll tell you, hey, you can't divide by 0. If it's anything other than 0, then I will just divide. Okay, so there we go. There's my function. It's created. So essentially, all this function is doing is I'm defining these 4 functions. Now, the one issue with this is that technically, like, every time I'm invoking this function, I'm defining this object. Okay, so it may be more performant for me to do something like this. X. Okay, now let's just talk about the pros and cons. If I do this, then this object doesn't get redefined every single time I run the function. It just exists, and this calls a particular function from it. But then this object will persist in my memory. Okay, it'll just always be there. So there comes a trade-off. If there's the extra time that it takes for the function to execute because it's taking the time to declare the object. But then there's a trade-off of the memory space. So basically, the function will run faster like this. But in this format, my program should be taking up more memory at any given time, because this will just always be hanging out in my memory, just hanging out there. While in the other manner, it's only exists during the execution of the function, but then the function's taking the extra time of redefining it every time. So there's always this sort of trade-off between space and time. I could store things perpetually and not have to worry about the process of recreating them when I need to. So, these are just little thoughts when you're thinking about, okay, how am I going to design my software, and what am I optimizing for? Am I optimizing for usage of memory? Am I optimizing for speed of execution? Because sometimes there's a trade-off. Okay, so just some more depth to reflect on. Cool. And if you have like any feedback on like sort of what you think is sort of the best choice, please do in the comments. I always like to hear more about sort of like what is the optimal way of doing something. Okay, well, let's try this out. So let's say here my function, let's invoke it. And see, I just pass a string, add, and then I pass an object with my args. So we'll say 1 is 5, 4, 2 is 4. Okay, I'm just going to copy this function. Okay, it's returning the value, so I need to console log it to make sure that we can actually see that it's doing something. Okay, there we go. So I'm passing the function into my console log, so that way the result gets logged. And doot sub mult div. Okay, and let's take a look what this ends up with. Terminal. Okay, node scratch .js undefined. Why did it return undefined? Are these not returning a value? My parent function doesn't return a value, so I want to return the result of that. There we go. Okay, there we go. So there we go. So see, the 4 plus 4 is 8. 4 minus 4 is 0. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 divided by 4 is 1. Okay, but I'm just using the same function. So we can actually just then now rename this function calc. And now I have essentially a calc function. Okay, and this is not necessarily like the most brilliantly put together calculator function, but because I can only really do 2 numbers, I didn't really like, but you get the point. Okay, cool. That's a way you could do it. Okay, and see, I didn't have to worry about like writing like a switch statement or an if statement. Which function runs is just based on the string. Okay, and so you're saving yourself the keystrokes of the if, you're saving the keystrokes of the switch, and writing the word case and break over and over again. It just runs the function based on the string that you want to run, and then passes those arguments over, and you just pass that in as another object. You could also do an array or do whatever you want, but I particularly like passing it in an argument object. I think that's a nice way to do it, because then you have named arguments, and I think it's nice to always just have sort of say, hey, these are my arguments. I'm gonna call this argument that. I think that's a nice way of doing things. Makes it easier to write in documentation. Makes it easier to explain. Makes it harder for people to screw up versus like writing arguments in a correct order. Although in this case, instead of just doing one big object, I did do 2 arguments. So technically, you would have to pass the string first, and then pass the object, and you'd have to know that. So there's still room for people to screw up and put those 2 arguments in the wrong order. But hopefully, like, this was just like sort of a cool pattern, and you're like, okay, I can see how that could be useful in certain situations. Not saying like every function you ever write needs to kind of have a setup like this, but you might have a function that you, or you may have like a construct you want to create where it's a function that can be used in several different situations, kind of like a Swiss Army knife. And this is one way sort of to design like that sort of Swiss Army knife like function, because there might be certain parts of the function that you want to repeat. And of course you can create like high order functions and break that apart into like different functions, so that way the parts, and then do like a call, like a high order function where you pass in a callback. But it depends what you're trying to do. Okay, so yeah, I just thought that was cool, and hopefully you guys enjoy that. Again, join the Dev Nursery Slack or Discord, and you guys can always reach out to me there. So if you have any particular like video requests that you want for me to make about just particular topics, send them over there. I'm always just looking for more stuff to talk about. Okay, and I'll see you guys later on. And also, I've been making a lot of blog posts, so make sure you check out the blog over there at devnursery.com as well. See you later.